guys, welcome to our self-portrait tutorial. I just want to first say thank you so much for being here. I've been noticing a few more people trickling in here, and it's really nice to see that you're all kind of wanting to join this little community. So thank you so much for being here. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a self-portrait, and this can be kind of interpreted any way you want. Maybe you want to make it a little bit more abstract and cartoony. Maybe you want to make it a bit more sophisticated and kind of like a traditional oil painting that you would see in the museums. But either way, you can get playful with it, get creative, start thinking of what you want to incorporate. First, we're going to do a quick sketch. And in this sketch, we're going to think about some of the things that we want to include that make you who you are. So what are some things about your appearance or your character that you can include that would make this a very personal self-portrait? Another thing that I wanted to mention, I haven't personally done this, but I've seen other artists talk about it, which is that they do a self-portrait every year. And I think that's a really cool way to both document the growth of your art and document your growth as an artist, as a person. So first I'm going to show you the materials that I'll be using today. You can use whatever you'd like. You don't have to follow along exactly what I'm doing, but I know it's helpful for you to kind of see what I'm using. So I'll take you through what I'm going to use, and then we're going to do a draft sketch, and then I'm going to trace my sketch on my watercolor paper, and then from there I will paint it. And I'm going to walk you through all the steps, and it's going to be very kind of detailed, so I hope you have a nice cup of tea or coffee next to you, light a candle, kind of get yourself in a creative, cozy mood, and let's get painting. First thing you're gonna need, pencil. I'm just using a regular HB pencil. You can also use a mechanical pencil if you prefer. I like HB pencils over mechanical pencils because I find that I can be a bit looser with an HB pencil. Next thing you'll need is a normal white eraser like this one or whatever color. I just don't like those pink ones because I find they leave marks on the page, so I prefer these white ones. And then you'll also need a kneaded eraser, and I prefer the Faber-Castell one. I talk about this one a lot on my YouTube channel. It's just very easy to use and it's very malleable compared to other ones that I've tried, so I always go for this one. I think it's like a few dollars more than the cheaper one at your local store, but it will last way longer, so to me it's worthwhile. Next thing that I'll be using is a butcher tray, and I'll be using this to mix all of my colors. So I'll put little swatches of color here and then mix them together on the tray. These are super easy to clean as well. You just put a bit of water in there for like 10 minutes. You just let it soak and then it'll wash right off. Some sort of little pot with water. This is actually one that I found in my neighborhood. One of my neighbors left it on the curb. We just kind of, people do that here, like when they don't want something, they just put it on the curb and then someone takes it. And I was like, that'd be so cute for water. And it's handmade, and I don't know, I thought it was really, it's not like that nice looking, but it's sweet because it's handmade. I'm gonna be probably using a mix of like a bunch that I have in here, but I've been really gravitating towards the Winsor & Newton, what are they called? These Coatman brushes are really, really good. They're the ones with the blue handle. I've talked about these before on my YouTube channel and I think on here as well, and I was worried that they wouldn't last, but they have so far and they're doing really good. So I'm gonna hang on to those, and I'll probably use those for the majority of the painting today. And next you'll need just some sketching paper. I'm using regular printer paper, but you can use whatever you have lying around. This is just for our base sketch, so we don't damage the watercolor paper too much before painting. And then for the painting, I will be using this fluid watercolor paper. It's a hot press paper, and I actually really love this one for skin tones because I know with hot press paper you tend to get very streaky marks, and I like that to some extent, but not too much. So this one is kind of a nice medium. It does still blend together like cold press paper, but you still get some of the hot press feeling that I like. So I really like this one. I would recommend it. The size that I'm using is 8 by 8 inches, so it's a square one. I feel like square is nice for a portrait for some reason. Last thing is a tracing pad, but I honestly might not even use this. I might just use the window. This is just to transfer our draft sketch onto the watercolor paper. So you can plug this in and it'll turn on, and you can just put your watercolor paper over your sketch to transfer. But if you don't have one of these, honestly, don't buy one. Like, I just use the window all the time. And then for gouache, as I mentioned, I'll be using a mix of Turner Design gouache. This is what they look like. They are wonderful. I talk about them all the time. This is the gram gouache tube that I have. It's pretty large. How do I do that? Oh, like that. It's pretty big, and it's a zinc white, which is nice. Good for mixing. I think I'm still not too sure about this, but I think that the titanium white is the one that's like super, super white for white, like opacity, and then zinc white is better for mixing, but I could be wrong on that. But yeah, let's get into it. I'll give you some tips and tricks along the way, and I just want you to really think about how you can take this self-portrait to the next level and make it fun for you and make it really something that is you. So without further ado, let's get into the sketching. Before we dive in, I wanted to kind of take a bit of time to think about the components that make me who I am. So I wrote down some really random things here. There's no order or anything like that. It's just either things I like or things that I do. So for example, I have coffee, I have dogs, I have blue eyes, I love my family. It's kind of nice to reflect here a little bit and even do a bit of journaling where you can think about what makes you unique and what makes you who you are. Now we're ready to get sketching. First, when I draw faces, I start with this sort of cross shape. I start with a line down the middle and then a line across, and then I start to build out the chin from there and then the top of the head. And here you want to start thinking about the shape of your face. Mine is pretty rectangular and kind of long, so I don't really have a rounded face. It's more of a sort of rectangle shape, so that's kind of what I'm thinking about here. Maybe your face is more of a heart shape, so you don't have to be very specific here or too detailed, but it's good to kind of have that as a base, and that will kind of help identify this a little bit more as you. It's helpful to have a mirror on your desk for this process as well. And as you can see, I create guides everywhere I go, so this just helps kind of keep everything in line. Really quickly, the top of the ears will come in line with the eyes, so I'm just adding in the eyes here. And the way to know if you have the right width here is if you can fit a third eye in between, then you're good. Maybe your eyes are closer together or further apart. That's totally dependent on you, but that's a kind of good rule of thumb to follow. Then I'll just add a little bit of an indentation for the nose. I don't like to get too detailed here. And then the corners of the mouth will line up with the center of the eyes. And then I just kind of build out the smile from there. I don't get too caught up in kind of the lines, and I'm just trying to make the suggestions right now of where everything is going to go. Now I'm going to start moving on to the eyebrows, and something to keep in mind is that the eyebrows can very much define the emotion that's being expressed on the portrait. So I like to keep mine very neutral. I put them pretty high up so that they look relaxed but also kind of friendly. And then I also keep them fairly straight so that they're not kind of showing too much emotion. I just want her to look happy and content. I don't tend to have that much facial expression myself, so I don't really want this to be too crazy, but feel free to experiment. I'm putting my signature kind of hair swoop here. I've got a little bit of a shorter layer that kind of frames my face, and I like that, so I want to include that. And then I'm including my side part. And as you can see, I'm just kind of refining the shape as I go. I'm not trying to be too precious. This is not my watercolor paper, so I'm not worried about ruining this sketch. Now what you're seeing me do here is just kind of refining everything and trying to think about the details that I want to include. So I drew in my jewelry really quickly. I was thinking about adding some overalls, maybe some ruffled sleeves. I was just kind of playing around. I have my hair in a ponytail a lot too, so I was experimenting with that, but I didn't like it. So feel free to just have fun and try out different things here. So here's another sketch that I tried. I was trying out some sunglasses, trying out some different things that I could incorporate, and I thought it might be nice to actually make this a fall portrait because I've been really enjoying the fall weather this year. And I wear these hats a lot. We call them toques in Canada, but I think you call them beanies everywhere else. So I thought it might be nice to kind of dress myself up as if I'm going on a fall walk. So I'm adding in a scarf, a toque, and I felt like this really brought it together for me. So I'm finalizing this sketch that I'm happy with. I'm just putting another sheet of paper over it and tracing over my sketch and kind of refining those lines and figuring out where they're going to be. The sketches can get pretty messy, so it's helpful to just transfer it when you feel like it's getting just way too messy. And then this way it'll be easier for us to transfer it onto our watercolor paper. So here's what it looks like after I've cleaned it up a little bit, and now I decided to add a little bit of a pattern in the background to have something going on. I really love the shape of oak leaves and I wanted to do a kind of abstract representation of that. So I'm adding these little squiggly leaves in the background, just planning out where they're going to be, and I think this will be a nice way to just kind of make it a very fall-like portrait. Now that our sketch is cleaned up, it's time to trace it onto our watercolor paper. For the sake of the video, I'm using my tracing pad here. It's also pretty dark out today, so it's actually better to have this rather than use the window. And I wanted you guys to be able to see what I was doing. So I'm putting my watercolor paper over my sketch here and just figuring out where I want the crop to be. You could also use a larger piece of paper if you feel like your sketch is too big and you don't want to scale it down. I kind of liked that it was cropped, so I was okay with it. And I'm just placing it here. And then I put a couple pieces of washi tape just to hold it in place so that it doesn't move. You don't need to do this, but it's just kind of helpful, especially for portraits. You don't want it to be moving around and then you lose the proportions that you worked so hard to get. So now I'm just lightly tracing my sketch on the watercolor paper, and I'm not pressing too hard here because I want to keep the sketch light, but pretty much I'm just kind of transferring it and making sure that everything is in the right place. And you can kind of adjust it if you need to. You'll notice I played around with the lips a little bit. I felt like she didn't look as happy as the original sketch, so I wanted her to have the same sort of happy smile. So I played around a little bit. Just make sure it looks the way you want before we get into painting. Okay, now that we have our sketch done, we are going to jump into the painting. I'm going to transfer my sketch onto the watercolor paper and then we will get painting from there. I'm just taking my kneaded eraser here and I'm going to use this and kind of roll it into a rolling pin in my hands, and then I'll roll it on the page to lighten my sketch very lightly so that I can still see it, but it'll just make it very light so it doesn't appear too much through the painting. Then I'm just adding a couple pieces of washi tape to keep my portrait in place so that I don't move it around. To begin, I'm using a size 8 Taklon round brush from my local store, which is above ground. These are really great. They hold a good amount of water, but not too much. I don't have a Winsor & Newton brush that is that size, so that's why I'm using that one today. And then I'm going to add some zinc white to my palette. You can see my palette's pretty messy. I already have a lot of color on there, so I'm not going to add too much paint here. The basic formula for skin tones is burnt sienna, burnt umber, and yellow ochre mixed with white. Now your ratio is going to depend on the color of your skin. Obviously I'm quite pale, so I use quite a bit of white, and I also have more of a rosy undertone. I don't have yellow undertones, so I add more burnt sienna than yellow ochre. So again, this will really depend on your skin tone. If you have a very dark skin tone, you can actually just use burnt umber and it really makes a beautiful skin tone color. And yeah, so remember here that the lighter your gouache looks on the paper, the darker it will dry. And the darker it looks, the lighter it will dry. And also, the more water you add, the less saturated it'll look. So you can kind of play around with it. This takes quite a bit of practice. Don't be hard on yourself if you don't get it right the first time. You might need to try this a few times. So I'd recommend getting a separate piece of paper and trying this out a few times before you get to painting so that you can feel confident about the color you're using, about the application. Skin tones are pretty tough. Like even for me, sometimes I have to start over. So don't worry if you don't get it right. What I'm doing here is just adding one solid foundation, which is the base layer of my face. And the only part that I'm not painting over is my teeth. Maybe you don't show your teeth in your own self-portrait, but I do because I like to smile with my teeth. So that's just the only part that I'm going to leave white because I don't want to cover that up. But everything else, like the whites of the eyes, I personally don't leave them white, but you can definitely do that if you want. I would suggest that you experiment with what works for you. This is my own kind of painting style, so yeah, I'm just gonna get one flat layer and then you'll see me kind of jump around a lot to different areas of the painting as we go. That's just usually because I will work on something else while I wait for that to dry. So while I'm waiting for my skin to dry right now, I am jumping into the hair. And my hair is quite blonde. I've always been blonde. But when you're painting blonde hair, you don't want to actually make it yellow. So I'm using a bit of yellow ochre, but I'm also mixing in some burnt umber and quite a bit of white again. So I want to keep it pale, and then I'm going to build in the darker tones afterwards. You can see that I have this spare piece of paper on the side that I'm using to swatch all of my paints just to make sure that I'm happy with the color before I put it down. One tricky thing for blondes is that our hair color is actually quite similar to our skin color. So when you first put down this layer, don't be surprised if it looks pretty much the same. We'll make sure to differentiate this later, but essentially you want to make sure that it'll be dark enough so that it contrasts with your skin tone. And also for me, for example, my skin tone is a little bit more on the pink side, and then my hair will be more on the yellow side. So they're not exactly the same, but they might look very similar in this first layer. If you're lucky to have dark hair, I shouldn't say that, every hair color is beautiful, but just in terms of painting, a darker hair and lighter skin tone is a very kind of easy, anytime you have a contrasting color or contrasting highlights, lowlights, that helps the painting process because that contrast itself differentiates in between the subjects that you're painting. So for example, if my hair was dark brown, it would show a lot more here and I wouldn't have to worry about adding too many highlights or lowlights, so that would be a bit easier. However, when you are blonde, you have to just go ahead afterwards and add a bit of dimension to it to differentiate them. For my fall scarf here, I was thinking of basing it on my real life scarf that I wear all the time, which is very neutral tone. It's very beigey, browny. So I started painting this in, and I'm glad that this happened because it will help me show you how I fix mistakes. But I realized very quickly that I could not portray the clothes that I actually wear because they just don't have enough contrast. It would be a very flat looking painting. So I tried to go in with a bit of a darker brown after that, but it just still wasn't looking right. So I decided to just kind of put it aside and leave it for a second, and I'll move on to something else in the meantime. But for now, I finished off the scarf, and you'll see after how I correct this mistake. But with gouache, I really like gouache for this reason, because you can kind of fix mistakes like this and correct things as you go. I feel like it's a little bit more difficult to do with watercolor. Of course, with acrylic, it's very easy. You can just paint over top, but gouache can be a little bit more forgiving, but also a little bit more difficult because you have to either go over it with a darker color or a very opaque layer of a lighter color. So I'll show you afterwards how I fixed this mistake, but you can see here right away that the color of the scarf just isn't really working. It's blending in with my face and you can't really tell what it is. So I'll go ahead and fix that after. For now, I decided to jump into my eyes. I have blue eyes, they're pretty pale, but I wanted to make them a little bit darker here so that they contrast with my skin. I used a little bit of black and light blue mixed together, which makes a very sort of neutral blue, and I just painted those very flat, just a small little kind of center of the eye there. And now that my scarf is starting to dry up, I can go ahead and fix that. I'm using some deep green, and this is by Turner Design Gouache, and I really like this color. I've been using it a lot in my work lately. You might have noticed. It's a very kind of foresty green, and I think it's really nice, especially for fall. So I'm just going over and I'm painting over that color with a deep green. And when you are painting over gouache, you want to make sure that the top layer is a little bit thicker than the bottom one, otherwise it'll pick up the bottom color and blend. So to avoid that, just kind of use a little bit less water and a little bit more pigment so that it just sort of sits over top and doesn't kind of pick up the bottom pigment. And then I'm using this to also kind of define a few strands of my hair that might be, sitting over the scarf. Now I'm taking a size 6 brush. Again, this is from my local art store above ground. It's just a regular synthetic Taklon round brush. And I'm going to start adding a little bit of detail into my skin here. So I'm taking a little bit of a darker shade, very subtly darker. You don't need to differentiate a lot to get that kind of shadow effect. And remember that even though it's looking very light, as I put it on, it's going to dry darker. So I'm being careful here not to make it too dark because these are just meant to be shadows, not lines on my face. And I'm just adding some contrast around the nose, under the lip, around the cheeks where the hair meets the face. This will be a good way to kind of differentiate the face from the hair as well. Now I'm taking a Winsor & Newton Cotman brush in size 0, and I'm going to use this to fill in my eyebrows a little bit. I personally keep my eyebrows fairly light. They're very blonde in person, and I just add a tiny bit of a brown pencil day to day to fill them in a little bit, but I don't like to make them very dark. So I want to keep them fairly light here as well. I do want to be able to see them, but I just, again, want to keep them pretty neutral. So I don't go into too much detail when it comes to eyebrows. They're just kind of streaks on my face, but remember here that the eyebrows will convey emotion, so just take your time with these. You don't need to rush them. Next, I'm mixing a bit of black with some light blue again, but mostly black in this ratio. And I'm going to use this to start painting on the eyes. And I know it's hard to see here with the way that I hold my paintbrush. I don't know why I hold it so weird, I always have. But I'm just basically doing a line over the eye for the sort of mascara line, and then I'm doing another small line under the eye just to show that my eyes are smiley. And I'm adding in a few little eyelashes here as well. Keep this simple and start small because it's easier to kind of make it bigger afterwards if you need to, rather than the opposite. Here I just took a bit of burnt sienna and burnt umber, and I'm using these to fill in the corners of the mouth. It will kind of come to a straight line when it hits the teeth and then point out towards the center of the eye for the smile. These will be the darkest points on your face. You guys, I'm so sorry. Something happened with my phone storage and it didn't record me painting the hat or the coat or the lips, but I just wanted to say about it that for the lips, I made sure not to go too dark because I don't wear a lot of lipstick. I usually just wear a little bit of lip liner, so I just painted those in very light, just one layer. And then for the coat and the hat, I wanted again to use contrasting colors, so I used a light gray and then also a bit of a terracotta color for the coat. And for the hat, I just did what I usually do, is add one layer of paint for the base layer, and then I did a little bit of shadows and effect around the fold of the hat. What I'm just doing now is adding in a few minor details to kind of separate some strands of hair. I added a bit of stitching on the coat, and then I'm just kind of adding in a little bit more detail to make it really come to life. It's helpful to add kind of darker lines around your objects to differentiate them. You can see that before I was getting really soft blend between the hat and my hair, so adding one small line of a darker shadow really helps to differentiate those two things. Now it's time to paint the background. I've got my little seashell dish here because my butcher tray got pretty full. So I'm taking a bit of white gouache, and then I'll also take a little bit of a red. I'm using the Coral Red by Turner Design Gouache, and then I'll also take a little bit of Naples Yellow. I like to add a bit of yellow to my pinks so that it's a bit more of a warm tone as opposed to a cool tone. It makes it a little more peachy, and I just kind of prefer that. It's a personal taste thing. I'm just going to go ahead and mix that up. I would say my ratio of water to gouache is probably 50-50. I use quite a bit of water in general when I paint with gouache, and I like to get those kind of streaky watercolor tones. And I'm adding in a bit of pink and Coral Red and Naples Yellow as I go to darken it a little bit, but I'm darkening it slowly and I'm testing it out on my swatch paper to make sure that I've got the right color. You can see here I barely can see the red, so I'm adding quite a bit more red. Red is a very strong pigment in general, so I'm usually pretty cautious about how much I add. So I'm just taking it slow, I'm building it up as I go until I have the right shade, and then I'll go ahead and paint the background once I'm happy with it. For painting the background, I'm going around my oak leaves here that I painted in, and I'm keeping this pattern kind of abstract and loose. I'm just going to paint around it, and then I'm also going to paint little stems in them, and I'm just going to go around the whole background and just do this one coat flat. Now I'm going to take some of that same pink, and I'm coming back with my Winsor Newton Coatman brush in size 0, and I'm going to use this to add a little bit of squiggly detail to the scarf. You know how scarves have those like knitted patterns? I really like those, so I'm adding that to the scarf here just to add a bit more detail and interest to the portrait. After that, I felt like the scarf was looking a little bit flat, so I added a bit of black to my deep green, and I'm using that to add a bit of shadow into the scarf here and there, just to add a bit more depth and dimension, maybe add a bit of kind of hint of a knitted fabric in between those little stripes there, those little squigglies. And then I'm going to also darken it where the ends of the scarf are, so around the folds or under my chin, and this just really helps to bring it to life a little bit more. For the background, I didn't want it to end up looking too flat, and I was thinking about painting those leaves yellow ochre, but I felt like that would be a bit too strong and take away from the portrait. So then I was thinking it might be nice to just add some wiggly lines around the leaves, and that's what I did, and I was really happy with it. I did test it first on a piece of paper on the side to make sure that I would be happy with the look, and I was, so I went ahead with it. Sometimes you get these little instincts when you're painting that you kind of can feel what the painting needs, and it's good to act on those, in my opinion. I think that kind of strengthens your artist intuition. It helps you figure out what the painting is calling for, and this will be a different experience every time you paint. Sometimes you might be called to different colors, or every painting I've done always kind of ends up looking a little bit different than what I had in my head in the first place. But when I follow these little artistic intuitions that we have, then I'm always happy with the result for the most part. So I wanted to mention that because I think that's an important part of painting, is when they say trust the process, it really means like listen to what your painting wants from you. And that's it, guys. We are done with our self-portrait. I hope you like yours, but I hope that most importantly that you had fun with yours. If you don't, please don't worry. I've done like so many of these in my lifetime, and it takes a long time to get it the way you want, and it takes a lot of practice, especially to paint yourself. It's kind of easier sometimes to paint other people, but painting yourself can be very difficult. So if you got anything from this, I hope you just learned a few things, and don't be afraid to try again and again before you get it right. It's very normal. It happens to all of us. So if you're not completely happy with yours, don't worry about it. Just try again and have fun with it. Don't forget to sign your artwork. I'm using a Jelly Roll pen, which is white in the size 0.8 millimeters. I love this pen. I use it a lot to sign my art prints that have a lot of greenery and dark tones, so it really appears nicely on the page. So I'm just doing that here. I hope that was fun. I hope you learned something and that you are happy with your self-portrait, and if not, don't worry, just either try again or thank it for whatever it taught you. If there's anything I've learned, especially about self-portraits, is that sometimes, most of the time, the first one just isn't right, and you kind of learn things that you want to apply to the next one. So feel free to draw these like over and over how many times you want to do, and each time it'll probably get a little bit better, so that could even be a fun challenge for you on its own. So yeah, thanks again for being here. I will post a poll for what you would like to see for our next tutorial, and if you have any feedback on this one, please feel free to let me know in the comments, whether it's critical or appreciative or negative, anything, just feel free to let me know. I want to make sure I'm making the right kind of videos that you guys want to see, so anything helps. Yeah, and that's it. I will see you guys next time. Bye.